fabulous. You all look wonderful. We've got a special guest this evening. I'm Sally, and our guest is Hannah, who you see on here. But Hannah's going to talk to us about stress and authenticity. You all know that last week was Mental Health and Awareness Week, and it was great. I know Hannah was doing lots of stuff, and we didn't do anything specifically related to that because there was just a lot of other things on and great things on, so we just allowed people to tap into everything else that was happening, which is great. But I thought this week would be really good to do. So we had last night How to Live as a Weirdo, which was fantastic. If you missed it, watch it on YouTube. It was really good. And tonight we've got Hannah, obviously talking about stress and authenticity and tips, hopefully, which will be helpful. Coping mechanisms are really good. Anything that we can learn to help all of us are fantastic. So, Hannah, thank you for agreeing to do this as our special guest. So I'll hand over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. Right, so Sally wants me to talk about authenticity and stress. So, and now she's just asked us to talk even more about stress. So we might just change things around as we go through a bit. Let's see how we get on. Or we can always have more of a Q&A session. When we do Q&A, we can cover more about stress and things then as well. She's given me the thumbs up, so that must be good. So, why authenticity? Now, I absolutely love talking about this. I started about probably 18 months ago now. I did a keynote for Barclays. I don't know if any of you know, Barclays do these fantastic breakfast seminars once a month, or they did. And I went and did one in August there. So that was the first time I sort of really talked about this, and it seemed to go down really well. And I've done a few things since. But I started looking into why we should be more authentic and how it would help our mental health, well-being, but also our career development as well. So I've came across this quote, which for me was the sort of the starting point. So I read here that it continues to surprise me how many leaders consider themselves to be one person at home and another person at work. And some even believe that leadership is somehow acting a part. And actually, when I've started these offers as physical presentations, I've sort of had people say, do you consider that you're exactly the same person at work as you are at home? Or do you think that you leave a part of you at home when you come into work? Obviously, this was pre-lockdown and it's slightly different and things have changed as we're in lockdown. But it's certainly something to still think about while we're still at home, because, are we still somebody different when we walk out of that office door with our families than we are on Zoom or on the telephone or even in written correspondence with people? But actually, maybe this is even more important as we start to go back to work, whatever that looks like. We've been more ourselves at home, and that's generally the message that I'm getting from lots of people that I'm talking to. Sally's seen in these sessions, and we've all seen, sometimes the children come in or the dogs or whatever, and we all just have to sort of roll with it. We can't get our hair cut and we have to sort of put up with that, etc. So how much of that sort of slight relaxation, I suppose, and bringing a bit more of our own personalities, how much of that will we take back when we go back into the workplace? And that will be really interesting to see. So, and when I mention leadership here, actually, what I mean, I don't want to put anybody off by thinking, it's just about being a leader, being authentic. It's not at all, because we're all leaders in some way, shape or form. Maybe we're parents of children, or even, godparents or aunts and uncles, or maybe we work with the Brownies or the Scouts or whatever it is, or maybe we have a PA, a secretary, a team, whatever it is. It's all leadership, really. We're all role models to someone, I guess, is what I'm saying there. But the second part of this quote is brilliant. So it surprises me that these same leaders who think they're one way at home and another way at work seem shocked, confused that their employees don't trust them, don't like them, and want to work somewhere else. So I think this, for me, sums up why authenticity is so important, because when we work with people, with teams, whether it is as their boss or whether it's as their colleague, their peer, and with clients as well, we can build levels of trust and understanding and connection that we couldn't if we're not our authentic self. And even to the point that if we're inauthentic, people don't trust us, don't really like working with us, and don't, you know, want to be somewhere else. So that's really interesting, I think. You all know me pretty well, I think, so I won't spend any time on this, but yes, I'm a commercial property lawyer at Gunner Cook. I'm self-employed, so on half the week I do commercial property and half the week I do coaching and training. I also work with the Women Lawyers and Mothers Group, which is a support group for women juggling work and a legal career. I have got 3 boys. That's part of my authentic journey, if you like, is talking more openly about my children, which everybody is doing now. But, you know, when I first started working from home 8 years ago, I hid for years the fact that I was at home with my kids. You know, I didn't think it was professional to be working at home and to have children around. So it was part of my journey to be who I really am, which is a mother who does work at home and does have children around sometimes. So that was part of sort of my authenticity and my journey with my clients and things. I'm also writing The Authentic Lawyer. That is my book that I'm working on at the moment, mainly because all of this is so important to me, and I think could be really a key tool for lawyers to learn and to embrace in their lives as well. Not just lawyers, everybody too. But that's who I mainly work with. So this picture came about because as part of my journey in looking at who I really am, because we sometimes in our journeys through our careers forget who we really are. We lose our identity into the identity of our career, you know, particularly in a job like law and many of the other sort of professional services professions. It's very easy to look at others and think, well, that's what a lawyer looks like, talks like, sounds like, acts like, even what they talk about at networking meetings. You know, we become almost a mold of others. And so in my journey the last few years, I had to really think, well, who am I? You know, what am I interested in? What do I like? What am I passionate about? And that was really a part of me actually learning to cope with the stress of the job. I'll be honest, the job was very, very stressful, and I didn't know if I wanted to do it anymore. And sort of looking at what was important to me and who I really was a big step on that journey towards reducing that stress. So the reason you've got this picture is, so I'm in the middle there, I'm the eldest of 3. You can't see my Little Pony tracksuit there, but when I talked about it at Barclays, they were so interested in that I've had to add a picture to the presentation since then, because they wished there'd been a visual. But that's my Little Pony pink tracksuit that I wore all the time when I was a child. So the significance of this is I was probably about 8 or so, I think, in this picture. And there is, when you see children growing up, children, when they're very young, are not afraid of what the world thinks of them. They are exactly who they are. They don't know how to be anything else. So you'll know, you know, children will stand up on a stage and sing and dance, or they'll want to do a play for you or sing a song for you. I think Sally was talking about this the other week with her children. You know, they want to come and do a play, or they want to sing a song to you, usually at the most inopportune times. But that's what they want to do. They're not afraid of who they are. They don't even realise or think about being afraid of who they are. They just do, and they just be. But there comes a point in our childhood, you know, it could be 6, 7, 8, something like that, where we're suddenly more self-aware. It's like this self-awareness comes in about the world and about the fact that we are judged, and, you know, what does the world expect of us? What does the world want? How can we keep being accepted? And, you know, I guess so this photo for me has that memory of almost the last time that before the world started judging me, or I felt that I was judged. So, you know, my dad would hire a video camera every summer. And as soon as he turned on the camera, I was the one in front of it. You know, I'd be pushing my brother and sister out the way to sing a song or deliver the 6 o'clock news about the rabbit or whatever it was. Whenever that camera came on, I was in front of it. But then over the years, I lost that confidence, that want to stand up and be at the front and do that. And, you know, a lot of that was journey into the world. It was moving house from the south to the north, and my accent wasn't accepted. So I was bullied a lot at school, to the point that I stopped talking to people because they didn't like the way I spoke. I wasn't accepted. So, you know, for about 18 months, I was barely spoken to when we moved up here. And as a sort of 10, 11-year-old, that was awful. And I had to change who I was. I didn't want to. And I think that's why I fought it for so long. But I had to change my accent. I had to fit in so that I could, you know, have a community around me, which is what people need. So it actually was a long journey back to remembering what I was like as a child. And actually I did like standing up and presenting and being at the front, and even teaching. Actually, I used to pretend to be a teacher with my brother and sister, and I think that's why I love doing workshops and trainings now, because it sort of reminds me of that. So yeah, that's just a sort of little insight into one of the tips I'm going to give you later, which is, you know, what are we truly like as a person before our career gets hold of us, before the world gets hold of us, you know, what was important to us. So that's my little snapshot of going back to the person that I was before the world got involved, if you like. So what does being authentic mean? What is authentic? So it came into the English language about 500 years ago, and its meaning was we all have our own path to tread. So we all have, you know, our own plans for our lives. We all have our place in the world, if you like. But conforming and fitting in is easier, you know, as I just sort of highlighted in that story. You know, we are tribal creatures. We are people who need community. You know, in the old days when we were cave people, we would die if we were outside of the community. You know, if we were pushed out of our community, we would not live. And that sort of, you know, old part of our brain that hasn't changed a lot since cave people times, still needs that acceptance and that belonging into a community. And that belonging could be a group of friends at school, or it could be a group of people at work, or even acceptance into a profession and the way that that profession works. So conforming and fitting in is easier and does keep us safer, because we still have this fear that we're going to die if we're pushed out of the group effectively. So in many professions, we use this character armor out of fear that we're going to be rejected or ridiculed. So character armor is, you know, and barristers and solicitors are a great example of this, because, you know, they even dress alike, you know, the black suits. And if you're a barrister, yes, the wig and the gown. You know, we have character armor that we pull on every day when we go to work. You know, I don't know if they still say it in court, because I've not been in court for years, but when I was a trainee and a litigator in the early years, you had to wear black suits to court, you know. So there was actually a uniform, and it was a bit like armor, because you know, you're sort of going into battle. And that's very much how it can feel in a career like this. So being courageous and being willing to be vulnerable is scary. So what I'm saying is, none of what I'm talking about here is easy. It's not easy to just be more authentic, be yourself. It's not the easy route. I think it's worth doing, and that's what I try and encourage people to do it, because it's worth doing. But it's not easy, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, because it does involve being courageous and being vulnerable to an extent, because we're opening ourselves up, the people that we really are, to judgment by others. I still think it's worth doing, but and we'll come on to talk about why that is. But I'm just saying that I know it's not easy. So if you're interested in finding out any more about the courageous and vulnerable side, Brené Brown is fantastic on this. She's a social researcher, and her TED talk that she did on vulnerability is you know, hugely popular. So if you just go onto YouTube and look for Brené Brown and vulnerability, I think it's about 14 or 16 minutes long. But yeah, it's fantastic the way she talks about vulnerability and its power in our lives. So she talks about effective leadership needing uncertainty, a willingness to accept emotional exposure, and willing to take that risks. So as I say, it's not easy to be yourself. It's not easy to be authentic, but it really does help you stand out from other people who are inauthentic. So it is about courage to take back who we are, courage to look at who we truly are, what our identity is, and have compassion for others as well, because I think when we're more authentic, we give other people the permission to be authentic too. And that really, we can connect with them on a much deeper level. So I always like to say here, you know, we've all been to the networking meetings, or even, you know, it could be a client meeting, it could be a personal situation where someone won't quite make eye contact with you, and you can feel as though they're sort of dodging around, or even they're looking for the next person to go and talk to, or whatever it is. And you don't feel any sense of connection with that person. You don't really feel that you would want to stay there and keep talking to them. And, you know, you certainly don't want to have a relationship with them going forward. So actually having that openness and willing to connect with people as simple as it sounds, you will stand out from others. So that's why, when I do sort of any networking or whatever training, this is one of my sort of top tips is, truly listen to the person that's with you and really listen to what they're saying, and allow that openness, allow yourself to talk about you and what you're passionate about and what's important to you, because people will warm to that far more than you talking about whether you're a commercial property lawyer who does refinancing and whatever's. So it's a whole different way of networking even as well, which is why I think it's a really good skill. So when I was doing my trainers training a couple of years ago, this was from my sort of coach and mentor at the time, who said to us that vulnerability can be our greatest strength. When we stand in a place of being completely vulnerable, our true nature shines through and we're incomparable. And that's where I think this is really important, because in many of our jobs, there's lots of people doing the same job. There's lots of commercial property lawyers. There's not quite as many crime and regulatory lawyers. Sean might be all right. But, there's loads of employment lawyers and everything else. How do we stand out? How are we different? And when we can connect with our audience or with our clients and build this level of trust, then we are incomparable. So all the good stuff is on the other side of vulnerability. And I can definitely say, as someone who's been down this, we're never, I guess, 100% ourselves. It's always a journey. But someone who's been down this path of becoming more myself, finding out who that is and being open to doing it, there's some fantastic stuff on the other side of vulnerability. The connections I've made with people and the relationships we've built, that some of them have turned into business relationships, some are friendships, all sorts of things are available when you're willing to take the risk, I guess, take the chance. So what authenticity is not, in my opinion, is not acting overconfidently when you don't feel it. Now I can sort of confuse matters a bit here sometimes, because I'm not adverse to a little bit of fake it till you make it. Sometimes we need a little bit of that, not to the point that it makes us really uncomfortable and turns us into somebody else. I'm not an advocate for that. But if we really want something, maybe it is to be a speaker or to do a workshop or whatever. The amount of people who come to me and say, I really want to do a workshop, but I'm terrified, and I sort of take them through and help them. So they have to do a little bit of fake it till they make it, because that first workshop, they're going to be nervous as anything, but they really want to do that thing. So it's like, how can we get ourselves comfortable? And sometimes a little tiny bit of faking it until we feel comfortable is good. But acting overconfidently is something else. It borders almost on sort of arrogance, if you like. And you can see it a lot in our professions of, yes, you see it more in men, but you do see it in women too, where they're just really overconfident and I say borders on sort of arrogance. And that's not authentic at all, in my opinion. Being grumpy with everyone on that day because you're in a bad mood. So the fact you're being authentic does not mean just you're in a bad mood, so you're going to dump all over everybody else. I'm sure we've all worked with a boss who does this. When I was a trainee, when my boss came in that day, and we were a whole floor, we were an open plan floor, and if he came in a bad mood, the whole floor was going to have a bad day. And if he came in a good mood, we'd have a good day. And that's not being authentic. There is an emotional openness, which I'm going to come on to talk about in a minute. But to me, that is something different to dumping your feelings all over people. So it's also not, so refusing to strive for something you want because you don't feel confident enough. This was like the example with the workshop, for example. If you really want something and you need to sort of build your confidence in able to do it, then that is being authentic. Being authentic is looking at what you really want and how can you acquire the skills, the knowledge, the confidence, the support to be able to go ahead and do it. So sort of not, in fact, we had a session today with one of my friends who's a recruiter for women partners. And we're talking about why many women don't go forward for partnership when they're more than qualified for it. And what she sees time and time again is they don't have enough confidence to do it. They don't believe they can do it, even though the firm that want her and are desperate for her to join really believes she can do it. She doesn't believe it. So, refusing to go for something you want because you're not confident enough is not authenticity. Again, it's about recognizing what do you really want and how can you get the support and the skills to get there. So being someone you're not, obviously, authenticity is not that. I think it's good to have a role model. It's good to have somebody to look up to. But ideally, you want to be choosing someone who is a bit like you. You know, you see a bit of yourself in them. You have the same values as them. You know, there's no point seeing your boss and using them as a role model if you don't like the way they go about doing things, you know. But if you see someone who you do like the way they do things, you like their values, what's important to them, then, you know, they're a great role model to start with, until you feel confident enough in your own authenticity and who you are. Because there is a difference here between sort of very junior people in their career and more senior people. As you get more senior, it's easier to think about what's important to you and what do you stand for. And when you're junior, I think you do need that mix of sort of who is a good role model for me as I grow into who I am in this career, if that makes sense. So what it is becoming and being the person that you're capable of being. So it's about having a look at what you want and what you're capable of, and how can you get that, you know, how can you back yourself to get that. So what could authenticity look like for you? So it looks like dropping the masks and the character armor, and that's not going to happen overnight. You're not just going to finish listening to this and walk out of your door and, you know, be someone completely authentic with no mask, no character armor. It is a very gradual process. But maybe today's session will just have you start thinking about where you could be a little bit more authentic. So it also means having no ego, no sense of, you know, self-importance, you know, being better than anybody else or anything like that. That's not authenticity. So being really present. Being present is a real buzzword, isn't it? It gets used a lot. But what I mean in this sense is, like I talked about with the networking. So you could be networking, or you could be talking to a team member or a colleague or a future client or whatever. So instead of listening to what they're saying, but in the back of your mind thinking, oh, I've got a really good point I should make here, or I know who I could introduce them to, or I know what I need to say next to show my expertise, etc. Instead of thinking about that, really listening to them. So giving them almost the gift of your time. You know, and Susan's nodding, you know, as a counsellor in her role, that's what she does, listens and gives people that gift of listening. Because that is, again, how we'll stand out, because not everybody does that. I mean, as I use the example of networking, how often are people just ready to jump in and say what they know? And, you know, I've seen it in team meetings as well. Somebody wants to be the person to bring up the next point. But if you're that person who really listens and absorbs what that person's saying before you then have your response, you will stand out as someone, you know, really open and really caring about what that other person has to say. So yes, there might be a moment of silence. You know, they stop talking. You haven't already got your answer pre-planned because you were listening to them. So there could be a few seconds of silence, but, you know, silence is a good thing, in my opinion. So there's nothing wrong with that. It shows that you've really been listening to what they've been saying. Emotional openness. So the opposite of sort of dumping your, you know, feelings all over people is this sense of emotional openness. So we all have to use our judgment here. You know, where we perhaps want to be more honest with those that we work with is if there is something going on for us, you know, if there's something big going on in our lives. I mean, right now it's lockdown for everyone, and many of us are talking about that with people who we come into contact with. But one example I always use here is one of my clients, her son years ago had leukemia. He's fine now. And Sally, this may be familiar for her too, but this client, although her son is very fine now, which is great, he still has 6 monthly checkups. So every 6 months, on the day before the checkup, she is snappy at work, she's short-tempered, all the things you'd expect from someone who's very worried to find out what the results are going to be the next day. So completely understandable. But she didn't want to share with her team. She was the team leader. She didn't want to share with her team the reason why, because she felt that was personal and it was a home-related thing, not a work-related thing. So I encouraged her to talk to those that she works with directly, and let them know, you know. So perhaps at the beginning of that week, she would say, oh, by the way, Friday is my appointment where we go and have our checkup and everything. So if on Thursday I am not myself, that's the reason why, you know. So her team could come and bring her an extra cup of tea maybe that day, or maybe ask her if there was anything else that they could do to help or whatever. So I do think there's a place for being more emotionally open with people that we work with, and even with clients. You know, if you're working with a client and something's going on and you need to be honest with them about it, then I think that's always a good thing. So being willing to be emotionally open with people, it does help you achieve achieve more connection to those people. Again, we talked about trust and connection, which to me I think is about business success, you know, so this can be a business tool, definitely. If we can have more connection to people, more trusting and honest and open relationship, then that's going to lead to more success in a business sense as well. Sally wanted us to talk about stress too. So I was going to talk about authenticity and stress, because I do think that they're connected, definitely. Because I think the more authentic we can be, the less stressful it is for us in our lives, because it is tiring wearing a suit of armor or a mask, you know, physically or metaphorically. It is heavy to carry a suit of armor and to carry a mask around all the time, and that is going to affect us. Trying to be someone else is stressful, you know. I mean, we can all imagine that. If we're trying to be someone that we're not, it's not easy for us. It's tiring and it's stressful. So ultimately, being more yourself does reduce stress, and becoming more authentic increases your self-confidence as well. You know, one of my favorite questions I get asked a lot is, where's the overlap with confidence and authenticity? And I like to think that sort of true inner self-confidence and authenticity go hand in hand. As one grows, the other naturally grows. So as you become more authentic, you do become more confident in yourself. And so they sort of go along hand in hand, definitely. It's easier to make the decisions that are right for you and your family and your work and your career if you're coming from a more authentic place about what's important to you and who you are. And this came from, actually, it was strange. I was Googling authenticity and stress and came up with this Japanese study that said the sense of authenticity is an important factor in well-being, you know, and I think that just sums it up. It absolutely is. So being more true to who we are and what we want and the person that we are definitely helps reduce our stress and helps increase our sense of well-being and happiness as well. So how can you be more authentic? Well, there you go. You just be yourself. That's what you'll read most of the answers as being. So there we go. But I'm not going to leave it there, because, you know, I like to give people practical steps as well as just theory. So how can you increase these skills of being more authentic? So think about your vision and values. Now, I know vision and values are corporate terms, but I mean about in your personal life. So what's your vision for your life really? You know, in 12 months or 3 years or 5 years time, what do you want life to look like? You know, what sort of work do you want to be doing, with what sort of people, in what sort of hours, in what sort of environment? You know, what do you see for the future of your life, if you like? And your values are about what's really important to you, you know, and when you think about the way you live your life, what is important to you? And very often people have never stopped to think about this for themselves. And if you find things that are important to you, and you're living sort of in conflict with them, then that doesn't help, and that's not being authentic. You know, once you understand what your true values are, then you can live your life in a bit more aligned with those values, and that will be far more authentic for you. So yeah, there we go. Are you living in accordance with your values, working towards your vision? And you know, I always like to throw in here, you know, stay on your own path, like that definition was. You know, we've all got our own path to tread. In many professions, it's very easy to see a path of success. Success looks like partnership, 6-figure salary, certain size house, certain sorts of cars, certain holidays in certain parts of certain countries, etc. But what is it for you? What's your version of success look like? Not the path that's sort of been set out for you. So that's important to think about as well. Here's my bonus tip for you, is think about what your 6-year-old was like. So this was the starting point for me, really, that you know, one of my first coaches gave me. What were you like as a 6-year-old? What did you enjoy? What did you love? What made you happy? And as I say, that's why I go back to that picture and that time where, yes, I was front and center of attention. And that was literally how I decided that I wanted to get into speaking and workshops, literally having that realization that was something that I enjoyed, but had sort of left me over time. But coming back to that was fantastic for me. But yeah, so what did you enjoy as a 6-year-old? Now I have got a couple of resources on my website for this. So it's authenticallyspeaking.co.uk/authenticity. And there's just a little visions and values exercise on there. I think it's about 12 minutes long or something. But it talks you through one of my favorite exercises that I know I've done with one of Sally's groups in person before, about your ideal day, your perfect day. Because if you're not sure what your future vision looks like, which many of us aren't at all, it's not clear to us, then this it's like a sort of meditation exercise, just a few minutes long, where you I talk you through this exercise where you can see what your ideal day would look like, perfect day would look like, and that can help you with sort of forming what your vision might be for the future. So it's a really nice exercise there. So just to finish on this, authenticity, I think, is an absolutely key skill, something to be embraced by us, by organisations, for mental health and happiness and efficiency and productivity of all of our businesses as well. So yes, it comes back to business too, but I do think health-wise and happiness-wise, it's really, really important as well. You all know me, that's my website, Authentically Speaking. I'm always happy to have a chat with anybody who wants to about their authentic journey, where they're at now, where they're going to, where their stress levels are at, all that sort of thing. And the other thing I'm doing at the moment that some of you may have seen is Friday conversations, so law in lockdown. So if you or anybody you know would be interested in having a 20-minute or so chat with me on Friday, it's just about their week basically in lockdown, how their week has been and how they're finding lockdown generally, that sort of thing. It's just to keep a bit of a record of how our legal profession has dealt with lockdown over the months and coming months